Okay, so today we are starting our discussion on monopolistic competition. So, hopefully you guys remember that we are still talking about the different types of market structures. So far we have talked about perfect competition, and then we looked at monopoly, which are, perfect competition and monopoly are on, completely on different ends of the market spectrum. Hopefully that rings a bell. So we looked at something like this. This was perfect competition, this was monopoly, and then we had monopolistic competition on one end, and right, and in the middle, and then oligopoly. So the reason, right, we talked about perfect competition first and then monopoly, and now we're going to the middle, right, to talk about monopolistic competition and then oligopoly, is that um, they're really, the perfect competition and monopoly are the extreme cases, right? So once you have a basic foundation for what those two type of market structures look like, it is relatively easier to understand what is going on with the other two. Okay, so yeah, hopefully the name itself tells you that monopolistic competition shares some characteristics with both perfect competition and monopoly. So let's see what some of those characteristics are. Okay, so monopolistic competition, we have a relatively large number of farms, right? So we have more farms than a monopoly. So how many farms were there in a monopoly?
Only one.
Only one, yes, very good. So it's mono, which is single, right? So there was one single farm, uh, producing and servicing the demand for an entire market. But with perfect competition, hopefully, I know it was a long time back, but you remember that there were infinitely many farms, in that perfect competition, right? So here we have a large number of farms, which is to say that it's greater than a monopoly, but of course it's also much smaller than a perfectly competitive market. Okay, so each farm, right, has a fairly small share of the market because all of these different farms are also competing with each other for the market share. So you have a relatively large number of farms, and they all have a fairly small share of the market. And the type of product that they're selling are differentiated, heterogeneous products, right? So this is where it's sort of similar but also different than a monopoly, right? So similar in the sense that they have differentiated product. Okay, so monopoly, remember that's what gave monopoly its pricing power, right? The reason they were able to influence price, right, the reason they are price makers is because they are offering a product that is unique and original, that nobody else has. So with monopolistic competition, they're also providing a heterogeneous product, right, which is completely opposite of homogeneous, which is perfect competition. So heterogeneous product and differentiated product. And so um, let's say, so one example, right? So if I think this makes more sense if we talk about examples. So uh, one good example of monopolistic competition would be like restaurants. So let's say if we talk about fast food restaurants, so McDonald's, right? So you can only get the Mac burger or whatever it is called, right, at McDonald's, right? So in that sense, if you only want the Mac burger, right, McDonald's has a sort of a monopoly on that, right? Because you can only get the Mac burger at McDonald's. But also remember that there are many different fast foods, right, restaurants available. So it's not like this is something that is so unique. The Mac burger is something so unique that you wouldn't be able to find at least a close substitutes if if you went to like Jack in the Box, Burger King, or in Wendy's, somewhere else, right? So this is why they're offering a product that is different, heterogeneous, but they also have close substitutes. Okay, it's not like monopoly in the sense that it is unique. Okay, but it is also not like perfect competition where it was exactly identical. Okay, so there are some differences. So each farm therefore faces its own downward sloping demand curve and also marginal revenue curve. Okay, so each farm faces its own downward sloping demand curve and marginal revenue curve like this. So this is where it's sort of similar to monopoly. So where it is different though, right? Remember with monopoly, because there was only one farm in this market, they faced the entire market demand for that product, right? That one farm. But here, of course, it's not going to be the case because there are quite a few farms in this type of market. So even though each farm faces a downward sloping demand curve, this is not the same as the market demand curve. The market demand curve, is completely different, but each farm faces a downward sloping demand curve and a marginal revenue curve like this. Okay? And then lastly, there is easy entry or exit in this monopolistically competitive market. So there are few barriers to entry or exit. So remember, this is very close to perfect competition, right? We saw that with perfect competition, there were really no barriers to entry or exit, which made it very easy, for farms. If they saw profits, they would come in, and if there were losses, they could exit this industry in the long run, right? It was very easy to entry or exit, which is, of course, in contrast with monopoly, because there were huge barriers to entry or exit, which is what makes a monopoly, right? Because somebody else cannot just come in and take away your profit. And then one of the major barriers to entry in this type of market would be advertising. Okay, because here, as you can imagine, every farm is trying to tell customers that their product is, at least a little bit different than their competitor in some way. So the only way to let people know about those is through advertising. So they have to spend quite a lot of money in advertising, trying to convince customers that their product is better or different. Okay, so that could be one major barrier. Okay. Hi, Joseph. I didn't really see when you came in, but are you caught up with us so far? Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so did you understand everything that we just discussed?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so now let's talk about profit maximization. Of course, that is the main goal. With every single one of these type of markets, all farms want to maximize their profit. So how is it that a monopolistically competitive farm maximizes their profit? Okay, so remember, they face a downward sloping demand curve and a downward sloping marginal revenue curve. And because there are many close substitutes available for their product, so this is one sort of slight difference with monopoly. The demand curve, right, their demand curve is fairly elastic, right? So it should be like a little bit more flatter. Whereas with monopoly, it might not be as, like, it might be more steep. Okay. So because this only stems from the fact that there are many closed substitutes available for their products. So if you think about elasticity, what it is that we are, what is the main point, right, of demand being elastic or inelastic, right? Elastic means you are very sensitive to price, right? So even if price changes a little bit, quantity demanded drops by a lot. And it makes sense that the monopolistically competitive market would have this characteristic, right? That demand curve would be more elastic because if one farm raises the price for their product, right, you could just go to another farm which is providing something like a close substitute. It's not like a monopoly, right, where you can only find that product from this one farm, right? So your demand for this type of product would be fairly inelastic. So this is another sort of difference between monopoly and monopolistic competition. Okay, so where the profit maximizing rule, right, is the same for everyone, right? It is you choose quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So that is where you will that is how much you will produce. You will set your quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and then you will find your price from where the quantity meets the demand curve. Okay, so it looks something like this. So let's do this. So this is the demand curve. This is marginal revenue. And then I'm going to draw the marginal cost curve. And here at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, this is my quantity. And then remember the price I'm going to get by finding where this quantity meets the demand curve. So it's over here. So I just take it, dash it back to the horizontal vertical axis to get my price. So this is my P star, this is my Q star. Okay, and here what I in the short run, a monopolistically competitive farm could either have economic profit or loss. So it is very possible that in the short run they could have either one of those situations. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. So in order to show what profit looks like, we're going to have to bring in the average total cost curve, and let's see. So it looks something like this. So this is the average total cost, and from here, hopefully you guys know. So when you draw the average total cost curve, remember that the minimum point of the average total cost curve, right, will cross the marginal cost. Okay, so this is how much my profit would be, right? So this is my profit greater than 0. So this box right here, because this is how much my average total cost of producing Q star is. And P minus ATC, right? That's my profit times this height. I'm sorry, this base of Q star. Okay. So everybody with me so far? Elias, anybody have any questions? Okay. Joseph?
No.
No? Okay, great. So this is, I hope, that is how it is, because it's not very different. Can you guys give me 1 second? Okay. So yeah, this is not very different than what we saw with monopoly, right? The demand and the marginal revenue curves, they look the same, and the way we draw the profit boxes is exactly the same as we have been doing ever since perfect competition. So there is really no surprise in that. Okay.
I just have one question.
Yeah. What was it?
What do you mean by average total cost of Q?
Oh, remember, how would find, this is, I just mean, what the height of average total cost is. So remember, everything is related to Q star, right? So I'm not looking at any other quantity. I'm not looking over somewhere over here. So I want to know what is my average total cost of producing, Q star. So this is the average total cost, right? The price is like all of that, right? So P minus ATC times this Q, that is my profit. So I just wrote this, because you see this average total cost, but the average total cost is different in different location, right? So when I write average total cost of Q star, I am trying to specifically show you, this is the average total cost of producing Q star is, right? So this level. Does that make sense, Natalie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So now I'm gonna quickly show you, what the loss. We said that there could be economic profit or loss in the short run for a monopolistically competitive industry. So let's see what the loss looks like. Demand, marginal revenue, then marginal cost curve, the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost to get Q star, and then where Q star meets demand, that's my price. So this level, Q star. Okay. And now, of course, since here I'm going to show you what, we're looking at the case, where there is economic loss. So from what you see here, right, at this Q star, right, the price is going to be much lower than the average total cost. So I'm going to draw it in above. So this is the average total cost of producing, so this over here. So this would be my loss box. Right? Profit less than 0. Okay. So this is the.
And you'll be losing because the average total cost is bigger than the price.
Exactly. So here is you see that at this to produce this quantity of Q star, right? So this is the price, but the quantity, the average total cost of Q star is like all the way up here, right? So your average total cost curve, right? Your cost curve, the location of your cost curve is a lot higher, and that's why you're making losses.
So that means they have to set a new Q star.
No, not a new Q star. So the Q star, right? You get that from where your marginal cost and marginal revenue intersects, right? So this is where Q star is, right? So it's just to show that this farm is not doing very well. They're making economic losses. They could try and cut their costs down, right? Or do something else, but at the moment this is just to show, like, for the purposes of demonstration, that this particular farm right now, in the short run, they're making economic losses. Okay. Does that answer your question, Natalie, or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Elias or Joseph, do you guys have any questions?
No.
Okay. So now, let's see. So we said that, remember, when we looked at, so this is why, we looked at perfect competition and also monopoly before we did any of these other type of markets. Okay. So because, we can go back to those two cases and like make comparisons. So remember, with perfect competition, we saw that there could be profits or losses in the short run, but then that profit or loss doesn't really stay, right? That it doesn't really exist in the long run, because there were no barriers to entry or exit, and so farms could come in when they saw profit, and they would take some of those profits away, and then farms could also exit if they saw losses, and some of those losses would then be reduced until there were zero economic profit and no more economic profit or losses being made, right? Until there was only zero economic profit. So it's the same idea. This is the same case with monopolistically competitive markets, right? Because there are no barriers to entry or exit. So Remember, what was that the same case with monopoly?
Mm.
What was the case with monopoly? Does anybody remember?
There were noisy like entries or.
So what does that mean for your profit then? Do you get to keep your profit, or do you have fear of losing them to other farms?
You can keep it.
You can keep
Like
it,
you always-
right? Yes, exactly. So with monopoly, right, you can have your positive economic profit in long run, because there are huge barriers to entry, right? It's not easy for farms to come in, so you really don't have any fear that other farms are going to come in and steal away some of my profit. But this is how it's different than a monopoly, but similar to perfect competition. Okay, so in the long run, each farm in the monopolistically competitive market will earn zero economic profit. Okay, normal profit, just like perfect competition. Okay, and the reason here is that when farms, when new farms see, right, that there are economic profits being made in this type of market. So let's say maybe you have a gas station, right? You have a gas station in some neighborhood and it's doing really well. You're making a lot of positive economic profit, and other people might see that and they might be like, oh yeah, there, it's relatively easier to get into this market, and I'm going to do that. And so they can just set up a gas station across from you, and maybe you're only providing gas, but they're providing coffee, and they have a convenience store, so they're doing something else to differentiate their product, right? So it's not just gas, but you can get some other stuff too, right? So here's what's going to happen. So when new farms enter the market, right, they're going to steal some demand away from you, right? So if you are the gas station, what's going to happen? The demand, right, some of your customers, right, are now going to go to the gas station across the street that just opened up. So you just lost some of your customers. So demand for your gas just went down, right? Yes. So this is once demand shifts, right? Demand is related to your marginal revenue. So if your demand is going down, your marginal revenue is going to go down too. So you're going to see a shift in both of those curves. So remember, when anytime we talked about supply and demand shifting, we said that they were going to shift parallelly. So this is what we're going to saw in the next slide when I take you through this adjustment and show it to you on the graph. But I just want you to understand the logic of it first, okay? That why is it that the demand is going to shift? And this happens because the products that they are offering, right, that the products that is being offered by the competitor that just came in, right, it is different, right? So they're gonna take some of your customers, steal some of your customers, and essentially lower the demand for your product. Okay, so it will cause a decrease in demand and also a decrease in marginal revenue. Okay, and in contrast, right, when farms are making losses in monopolistic competition, and they're making losses in the short run and they want to exit the industry in the long run, right? So they're going to exit, and what's going to happen is that when that one farm exits, what is going to happen to the customers, right, that were shopping with them, right, but they're no longer in this market anymore. So what those customers are going to do is now going to go to the existing farms, right? So this way, when farms exit, they add demand to the remaining farms, right? Because you went out of the business, you went out of the industry. So what are your customers going to do now? They're going to have to find some kind of alternative, and that alternative is going to be going to the farms that are providing a close substitutes, right? So that's how the farms exiting will cause an increase in demand and also an increase in marginal revenue. Okay, So entry causes decrease in demand and decrease in marginal revenue. Exit causes increase in demand and increase in marginal revenue. Okay. So let's see. This is we're gonna try to show this on the graph. Okay. So here, what we're talking about is like a hot dog shack. Okay. So the product here is hot dogs, and the individual farm that we're talking about is Bob's Hot Dog Shack, and here are Bob's competitors. So hot dogs are, you can make them be different than each other, by flavor, by offering different sauces, by offering other things, right? So they are all offering hot dogs, but it is safe to say that all of their hot dogs are slightly different from each other, differentiated, heterogeneous hot dogs. Okay, so here, let's see. As you can see from this graph, so let me just draw it first. Okay. Oops. So this is demand. This is marginal revenue. Oops. Okay. And then we're going to draw in the marginal cost curve. So this is Q star. And this is P star. Okay. So then we're going to draw in the average total cost curve. And here, we're doing the case where there is short run profit, where there's profit in the short run, and how then the market sort of adjusts in the long run. So we're going to show a situation where there is profit being made. Okay. So then I draw the average total cost curve like this. So this, okay, so this is price. Okay. And then this would be the average total cost, right? So average total cost of producing Q star is over here. So all of this is the profit. Okay. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away this part because I'm going to have to show the shifts, and I don't want the graph to get too messy. Okay, so here what we're seeing, or what we're going to show here, is that Bob, this one person, right, he is selling hot dog and he is making a positive economic profit. So it's probably the case that his competitors are also making positive economic profits, or not. But in any case, Joseph is somebody, he is another person who is looking to enter a new business, and he sees that hey, so I see Bob is making a lot of economic profit. So he's saying to himself, like, there is relatively there is really not a huge barrier to entry in this kind of market, and I can go into this market and get some of that profit for myself. So here's what he's going to do. So he's going to come in to this market, right? So he enters the hot dog market, and what that then does, right? So right now we're talking about Bob. So what that does for Bob is that it's going to shift his demand down. Okay, so this was this black line is his demand, original demand, and this over here is his original marginal revenue. So what we're going to do is we're going to show it in a way when Joseph comes into this market, it's going to shift Bob's demand and his marginal revenue curve downward. And remember, anytime we show shifts in demand and marginal revenue, we're going to have to show parallel shifts. Okay, so you cannot be like this, this is not a shift, it has to be like parallel to each other. Okay, so here I'm gonna do a different color. Okay, let's see. So I'm gonna draw in the demand curve first, and I have to be careful here because I'm gonna eventually show that there is zero economic profit being made. So let's see, what's this? So see, there is a parallel shift downward of Bob's demand curve, And now I'm going to do the same with the marginal revenue curve, okay? So this is the new marginal revenue curve, MR1, right? So they're parallel, right? The demand D is parallel to D1, MR is parallel to MR1, okay? So now, as you can imagine, there is a new marginal revenue curve, and then there would be a different intersection of my marginal revenue and marginal cost. So of course, the profit maximizing quantity is now different than before. So this is where the profit maximizing quantity is, right? So this is Q1. And
I have a question, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's related. Kind of.
Okay.
Why do we speak like in terms of margin revenue and not just revenue, like total revenue?
Remember how we had this, because this is the way it is in economics. We don't really care so much about total revenue or total cost, right? We do care about that. Remember how profit is total revenue minus total cost, right? But if you had calculus, this would make a lot more sense, like for me to understand it. Because if you anytime you want to maximize something, you have to take the derivative of it, like the first derivative, and then the first derivative of total revenue and total cost are marginal revenue and marginal cost. So I know this doesn't help you right now, but we are trying to, what we care about is when if I sell, right, one more item, right, if I sell one more of something, how much additional money do I bring in versus how much it will cost me to produce that additional unit. So that is what essentially I care about, okay? Because if I am, so it's like climbing a hill, okay? Your marginal revenue, it's the additional money you bring in, and then this is the additional cost for producing that next unit. So as long as this is greater than that, you just keep doing more, and if this is less than that, you do less. But when they're perfectly equal to each other, this is when your profit is the most that it can be. So by marginal revenue being greater than marginal cost, right, you can, the idea here is that if you do more, if you produce more, you can still increase your profit, okay? And if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, right, if you produce more, you're gonna decrease your profit. But this is where your profit is as big as it can be. Okay, so this is why we care about marginal revenue and marginal cost. But it is also because maximization of anything is looking at like really differentiation, and calculus is essential to that, and so because we don't really do calculus in this course, so this is why you just have to sort of take my word for it when I tell you that profit is maximized when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So here, right, we care about choosing quantity. So how much I should produce. So I should produce when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, because that will maximize my profit. So Natalie, does that help?
Yes.
Were you here when we did, this part? I think it was with perfect competition, like when we looked at marginal revenue and marginal cost, and why it is better to do it with marginal revenue and marginal cost rather than going through this and finding out total revenue and total cost, and then looking at those columns, trying to find where your profit is maximum. Were you here for that lecture?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think if you take a look back at that, I think this might make more sense. It's just this is mathematically easier to do. That's one way of looking at it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So here, going back to what we were talking about, right? So I showed you the shift of the demand curve, parallel shift, going from D to D1, and then parallel shift going from this original marginal revenue to this new marginal revenue, MR1. So we see that there is now a new quantity where your old marginal cost is intersecting with the new marginal revenue. So this is Q1. And what we see here is that this is where the price would be, where your marginal revenue, or the quantity, where the quantity of Q1 meets your demand, right? So this is your new demand. So this is also over here, this is P1. But what do you notice about this P1 and your average total cost? Is your P1 greater than your ATC anymore?
No.
So remember, this is the height of your price, right? This is your base, that's quantity, but the average total cost of producing Q1 is the same as this P, right? It's the same height. So then what that really is telling you is that total revenue is equal to total cost in this case at P1 and Q1, which means that you have zero economic profit or normal profit, right? So this is the same way we did it with perfect competition, right? Where we showed what kind of adjustments happen in the long run, right? Here the adjustment process worked like this, that whenever there is profit being made by farms in the short run, new farms will come in, and what that does is, for the existing farms, it will lower the demand for their products. So their demand curve shifts down, their marginal revenue shifts down, and therefore now the quantity that they're producing is lower than before, the price that they're receiving was lower than before. So farms will keep coming in until, right, price is equal to ATC, and you have total revenue is equal to total cost, or zero economic profit. So this is the same sort of idea as we saw in perfect competition. Okay, the idea that there will be zero economic profit in the long run. Okay, any question?
No.
What is there anything that's confusing, or you're not understanding from the graph? Anything that's hard to look at, or So the only difference here is that you're gonna have to shift two curves, right? You don't touch the cost curves, but you're gonna shift the demand, right, from D to D2, and then you're gonna shift the marginal revenue. And of course, when you do those, you're gonna have different quantity and different price. Okay, and here I have shifted it carefully by the amount, so that I had zero economic profit. Okay, so of course you should understand that it doesn't happen like this straight away, right? At first maybe demand shifted a little bit, right? So marginal revenue also shifted a little bit. Imagine like there was a line in between. So if demand shifted by a little bit, marginal revenue would also shift by a little bit, and so there would still be a little bit more profit. Profit doesn't automatically go to zero, right? It happens step by step. So it was just easier to show in one step here that this is what's gonna happen when new farms come in. It will lower the demand for existing farms and lower the marginal revenue, and this will the price will be lowered, and it will keep lowering until it is equal to the average total cost at the quantity. Okay, All right, so this is as much as I could cover from my last class, so I'm gonna keep it the same with you guys. So when we come back on Tuesday, we're gonna finish up with short run losses and also what kind of efficiency there is or isn't with monopolistic competition. Any question?
Okay.
Okay, thank
All right.
you.
Thank you. Bye bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.